Hello, welcome to another ClubPF Masterclass. The week is April 1st. Today's April 2nd. We're actually recording this the week before, though. Excited about today's Masterclass. It's a leadership-centric Masterclass, the growth lessons from a 2-person to 200-person marketing team. And there are a lot of growth lessons. I am joined today by the one and only Shannon Curon. Shannon, what's going on?
Too much. I'm good. Teams, that's my favorite part. So I'm really excited to talk about it. Do you want me to do a little intro?
So you've worked at 3 different companies, correct?
Yep. 4, I think we're missing, yeah, I guess. let's call it 3. So I have been in tech for the last, 8 or so years, starting where I grew the kind of quickest and got my teeth cut in tech at QuickBase, which is a Vista equity portfolio company based out of Boston. And I started the content marketing function there and then grew their comms function, their brand function, and then moved on to work at a venture capital firm called OpenView, which is also based in Boston, and ran all of their kind of content strategy, did some advising of their portfolio, and built out their thought leadership platform, and then moved on to be the vice president of marketing at a Series A rev tech startup called Mad Kudu. And now I actually just went out on my own, so opened my own consulting business where I help founders really mostly around messaging, positioning, and go-to-market strategy to define their why does it matter, right? So understanding where they differentiate in the market and how they can activate that in their go-to-market. So yeah, it's been very exciting. Love the work. And yeah, really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. She's a member of ClubPF. By the way, you can drop your questions in the Slack thread in the Masterclass and events channel in Slack. Myself, be happy to answer them. Get other people to chime in as well. But we're going to talk about 7 different things today. Like Shannon, I've been part of small and large marketing teams. The largest at HubSpot. So I'll hopefully glean on some experience. It's actually bigger than 200. It was 300 people by the time I left. It grew from 15 to 300 people, Shannon. My team was about 40 people. And then at Drift, I saw a team grow from 10 to just under 50. And I had about half that team reporting into me. So we want to talk about these 7 things: how to scale yourself and team, coaching, super important, right, Shannon? Coaching.
Yep.
Career development, as important as coaching. Hiring, which I would argue as a leader is the either number 1 or number 2 thing to always be obsessed about.
Yep.
Rituals. I'm a huge believer in rituals. We'll talk about that. How to give feedback, and then managing up, down, and across. A lot of stuff.
To do.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I said lots to do. I think all of these things are, just to give people context, I've typically been on smaller teams, but I've seen them grow from sometimes 1 to 10, sometimes 1 to 10 to 5, sometimes, and my QuickBase marketing team was up to 40 by the time I left. It was at about 10 when I started and 40 when I left. So I've seen a little bit more of that middle, but I've definitely cut my teeth mostly in that smaller category, when we're talking about hiring, even more critical there, right? So I think, excited to see both ends of the spectrum here.
100%. And it's why we have the title being 2 people to 200. So it's like you get both ends of the spectrum between Shannon and myself, which is fantastic. So the first thing I want to call out as it relates to leadership, marketing leadership doesn't matter, Shannon, is stop making excuses. A lot of the things we're going to talk about today, you might be like, hey, I don't have an HR team, or my HR team doesn't provide that, or I don't have enough time, or my recruiting team is letting me down. Those are all excuses. Do not make them. And I know that's easy to say, hard to do. I've had to learn this lesson over the last 17 years of being on and then probably about 14 years being a leader in some capacity. The buck stops with you. And I just think excuses are a bad thing to say, to do, and to focus on. Shannon, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think you'll find in a lot of the stuff that we talk about today, it wasn't mandated from the organization that we did these things, right? And I think often I found where I got to grow. So if people are watching this session that are looking to become people managers or are looking to become from a functional manager to a full organization manager, where I've been able to see a lot of growth is that I've instituted these things on my team. And then you see my team be super successful, right? And then everyone's like, wait a minute, what's she doing that we aren't doing because her team is really successful right now? And it's not actually all that much time. It certainly takes time at the beginning to really understand, but a lot of this session is giving you the keys, right, to understanding how we've done this and the frameworks we've built. But I think there is a lot of value in being the first mover here, because I think it's very easy to say, well, we're a Series A, we don't have a head of people, or we don't have whatever, and so I'm not going to do quarterly reviews, one-on-ones, or I'm going to do things very haphazardly. And I think you'll find that if you take the time to do it, your org is going to thrive, and that is what's going to actually help you grow in your career. And it's been really, really critical for me, and something that's helped me a lot over the years.
Very well said. So let's dive into the first agenda item, which is around how do you scale yourself and your team? And Shannon, I really think you have to focus first on yourself. Like if you as a leader aren't in a position to, I would call it like be in control. And it's not just in control of your work, your time, it's your emotions, it's your approach, it's all of these things. It's going to be hard to scale any type of team. And so we've listed like 4 things here that we are going to double click into right now that are critical to scaling yourself and team. The idea of creating team-based principles, guiding principles to really make sure people know what do you and the teammates expect from one another when it comes to behaviors, when it comes to outcomes. We had 7 guiding principles when I was at HubSpot for my team. We had 5 when I was at Drift. Like guiding principles, I think are super important. We're going to talk about how to use the mission and purpose of your team and align that to your organization's mission, frameworks, and systems. So Shannon, what are some tips here that you've encountered as you've seen teams grow that are critical to any of these 4 things?
Absolutely. So I think to respond a little bit to having to start with yourself, I remember in the deepest depths of COVID is when I had my largest team, right? And I remember that I had to spend so much time on making sure I was doing well so that I could be available to them, right? Like if I was in a place where I was really reactive or I was very stressed, like every time they came to me, I could not be a great leader for them. So it was really critical for me to spend that time on myself and really say like, what's the value I can provide them? And I think actually the guiding principles and the mission and purpose really help with this. These sound squishy. Like I will tell you, like, so you have a number to hit at the end of the month. You are, especially if you're early stage, you're like, I do not have time for guiding principles. Like, what are you guys doing? Right. But I will tell you, even if you have 2 direct reports, if you have 3, if you have 4, if you have 5 contractors and 2 full-time people, if you are able to connect those folks around how do we behave and why do we exist, a lot of the like one-off back and forth, especially if you're fully remote, this is going to let your team hum without you. And that is what you need to get going because you need to scale yourself, right? Like there's a reason why, especially if you're a first-time manager, stepping into this it's a fundamentally new job. It's an absolute, like it is a new job. And what you need to figure out is how to get all of these people over here, whether there's 1 or 50, hopefully 1 if you're new, that would be terrible. To really hum without you, right? And I think that's where a lot of the guiding principles, the mission and purpose, especially the frameworks, like they know how you make decisions, so they don't have to come to you for every single tiny thing. You're providing them a context, a fence of what great looks like so they can run. There is nothing worse than having a high performer. Like I use this metaphor usually about like letting my dog out. I have one of my, not that people are dogs, but stay with me here, about having, if before we had a fence, I would open the door and he'd be like, can I go? I don't know if I can go. And he had so much energy to run, right? The second I put a fence in, I open the door and he is gone, right? And he knows where he can go to the edge, right? And that's what frameworks and systems provide your team. So that was a little bit more of like a high level example of what these things do for you. I know Mark has lots of actual frameworks that he can share, but I think they are worth your time. I promise. Don't spend 4 weeks on them, but like the 4 hours that you can spend on this stuff is really, really critical.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if you go to the resource section in the club, you'll see a lot of frameworks and systems you can use, like integrated campaign framework, right? That is a type of framework that organizes your team with maybe other teams. I think to your point around never assume it's too early to start with developing these things. Like, do it from day one when you're a team of 2 or 3. I did it when I was just a team of 3 at HubSpot when I got my first official management position at HubSpot. Super important. It helped us scale to 40. It also is very important as you have 1 or 2, if not more than 2 layers of management underneath you. You need your managers to be able to understand what is acceptable and unacceptable, what's tolerated and not tolerated. And at the end of the day, that, to your point around like guardrails, all of these things, but especially the guiding principles and mission and purpose, will help you give feedback, do coaching, but also, reward and recognize good behavior, but also you could say hold people accountable, to which is the next slide, to maybe not such good behavior. And as we transition to the next discussion point around team coaching best practices, those 4 things are critical from a coaching standpoint, because if you don't give coaching with specificity, and also you don't give coaching with as objective feedback as you can, right? Like sometimes subjective is okay, but like you want to be objective. You're gonna create like confusion amongst team members, right? And like you could coach one person one way, coach another person another way. Sure, situational coaching and leadership must be done, but you also want to have team unity and cohesion. At the end of the day, though, accountability to all of the things we just showed in the last slide starts with you. Like you need to create them. You need to do that. It's, again, to Shannon, your point, don't make excuses. And as we pivot into coaching, I think there's no better thing when it comes to not making excuses around. Like you as a leader, you have to coach.
Yep. It is your number one job, right? I think there's you could even argue that hiring is a part of you could there is like a big bucket of things that could go under coaching, right? I think this is something that I actually feel so strongly about, and I have been doing since the first day I got my first direct report. So when I worked at QuickBase, I only had 1 direct report for a little bit, like just 1. And I talked about her as if I managed all of North America. Like I took it very seriously, right? And I think the biggest thing that always grinded my gears is this idea of an annual review that was surprising. You get into an annual review and you hear feedback about the way that you've been working that you've never heard before. And that is like management failure 101, right? Yep. So, and especially if you have really high achievers, sometimes feedback hurts. Like it doesn't feel great if you're anticipating it. But if it's a part of your everyday job, that it feels consistent, it's just the way you communicate, they are not coming into those reviews panicked and worried about anything. Like I always joked that I want your review to be the most boring meeting we've had all year. Like it should just be like kind of a time we take to be able to discuss things you already know, but we can expand on them. We can take extra time for them, but like it should not be something you're coming into to hear new information, right? Like that should really be, it should be a culmination of a lot of things we've worked on and a way to connect on what we should be working on in the future. So yep. A good example of what we talked about before is, I've worked at organizations where, so at this first organization, we didn't have a quarterly review kind of process. Like it just didn't happen. But I felt so strongly that I wanted to have weekly one-on-ones, one of which of those a month I dedicated to like not week to week conversation, but future conversation. So I said, this is yours. So we can talk about any topic. If you want my feedback on something, if you want to talk about your 5-year plan, you want to talk about how to integrate having kids and working, I don't care what you want to talk about. But like, I'm going to give you 1 a month, and then the others will be consistent one-on-ones that have structure. And then at the end of that quarter, we're just going to take all of the stuff we've been talking about, it's all the same document to even be that pedantic about it, and we'll bring it up to say, what are your 3 greatest strengths and what are your 2 biggest opportunities and what's the action plan that we're going to build to be able to do that. And that sounds like a lot of structure for a startup or for whatever, but it's actually not. It doesn't take a ton of time. It just gives you a shared language around coaching that makes it feel a lot more partnership focused and a lot less critical, I would say. And I've had to do this with folks that are underperforming. It's not just with folks that are doing great, but you're able to catch it early, and that person feels like they're in it with you in the coaching. They don't feel like you're just coming down on them for things. It's like, okay, I know we talked about this last week. What's the update? Like, so it's not, at the end of the year, you don't get half your bonus because of things you didn't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the worst.
No, I mean, coaching rituals. We'll talk more about rituals in a moment, but like, develop the rituals. Like you said, each month they can expect there's going to be a coaching conversation, but then coaching and feedback kind of go hand in hand to some degree. I think coaching is also very important as it relates to what are the goals you're measuring this person against, which is our system. So there's something in the club as well in the resource section. It's a weekly goal or KPI pacing document. Everyone on your team should have goals, quantifiable goals, even if it's activity based. Obviously outcome based are the best, but to coach, you need to give them the context, and context, half of it is around goals, right? Like, are you achieving your goals? Are you not achieving your goals? And how are you achieving your goals? Which is related to one of the next topics, which is the bridge between coaching Shannon and career growth, which is ownership. Like, giving your team members ownership of their development through the right guardrails, through the right coaching, to then helping them set up a career development plan. But at the end of the day, they are responsible for that. You're helping and supporting them in that, but they got to take ownership of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and where they want to go in the next 6, 12 plus months. So,
Absolutely. Full agreement.
Let's talk about career development then as a nice bridge. Tell us more about how you think about career development. It's more of a long-term thing versus coaching that's happening, weekly, if not daily, and related to like what's going on in the quarter. How do you think about these two things?
Absolutely. So I think about, from even as I'm building a profile or a player card. Sorry, my cat is in the video. Of how to hire. I think about the career development of that person before they even exist. Like, you're building a player card for what this role is going to be in the way that you see your organization growing. And in that, you should be able to see what this person can develop into. Of course, especially early stage, things will change and morph. But you should be committed to understanding that this one role is not the end all be all for most of the people on your team, right? Like, how can those people grow and change, whether that's laterally or whether that's, don't hire someone that wants to be a people manager if it's not in your plan to have a second layer in your organization for 2 years, right? So that's really important to have on as something you're thinking about as you're coaching folks for greater career path planning, right? I think a lot of people say at startups we don't have career paths. I think that's kind of BS, to be honest. Like, I think that means you have kind of a lazy leader that doesn't feel like getting to know their team enough to be able to coach them to say where can they go in the future. Also, it means sometimes that career path is not at your organization, and that is awesome. Like, that is fine. Like, I think that's really important to know your people and say, like, I think this is what you can do here. If it's not what you want to do, let's make sure we're in agreement of what that journey looks like for you, right? And I think that's why I've been able to have really good relationships with the folks that have worked for me, because I'm not territorial over them, right? Like, it's like, let's make sure that you feel like your career is everything you want it to be, and I'm there to help coach you through that. And that means I'm getting the best of you while I have you. And that is important to me, right? And I know that you have some more clear templates here that I'd love for you to talk through.
No, you nailed it. I mean, it's spot on. Download the template. It's another thing you can find in the resource section of the club, but this one I called specifically out. I've been using this since like 2013 or 14. It's iterated over time, but it tries to put the person in control and helps them, Shannon, which is another transition. We've designed this deck pretty good, by the way, so kudos to us. With preparation. There's two types of preparation. It's preparation to help you play the game that you're trying to play today, but then in the future. But I loved your point around the player card and thinking through, I'm hiring this person to help with do something today, but what's the fit maybe, or their potential, hire for potential, not for today, in a year or two from now. So... I really think you nailed it with that whole talk track around career development and whatnot. Like, talk to us though about your approach to hiring. Like, we broke it down into these two stages, like product market fit, go to market fit. But before we even talk about these stages, how do you think about hiring people, and what are some of the best practices you want to share about this?
Sure. I also think I accidentally talked over you right before this because I froze a little. So I'm sorry if anyone experienced listening to that. So when I think about hiring, I know, Mark, you and I have talked about this a lot, that there are a few roles that you really want to have internal, and then there's lots of stuff that you can rent, right? Which is specific skill sets. It's some things that are seasonal. It is things that are going to come in and out. Right now, I advise almost all seed and Series A companies, and hiring is truly the largest lever or biggest anchor sinker for an organization, right? So you say, I only have the FTE of 2 marketers, or I can only have 1 sales rep, or I can only have 1 person in go to market. What does that person look like, right? And I think that when I think about hiring, I think about who is a person that can flex and grow with the organization that really holds the ethos of the organization. So you'll see a lot of people talk about culture fit. I don't love that term. I love the idea of, like, is this person a culture add? Do they add value to the organization? And do they operate on the same values that the organization has, right? Like, especially if we'll talk in a second about hiring for stage instead of function. I find this is something that I really did not understand until I started advising a lot of startups, specifically when I was at OpenView. They would hire these amazing all-stars at great companies to come in, and they would be looking for resources because they always had them at, like, I was just advising a company that almost everyone there was from Hewlett Packard. They were at JP Morgan. They were at all these really large companies coming in. They were great. They're super successful, but this company is a Series A that is running out of cash. So they are looking for people to be scrappy and looking across the organization. How can we do things quickly and learn? And the people that they hire just don't have the DNA to do that. Like, they are used to having, like, a lot of structure and process, and they're excellent at their jobs. They're just not being successful in this organization, right? So I think it's really critical to look at not just the function, but also the stage of company and where you're looking to be. And you can't look too far ahead in this market. Not every company is hyper growth right now. And so, we talked a little bit earlier talking about who you need in a year. You're not really sure where you're going to be then. So, like, let's think about folks that are very flexible, and you can rent out those more specialized skills with contractors or freelancers or advisors.
Yep. Agree. Culture add is what I say, not culture fit.
Yeah, that's what I say too. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then, competencies, no excuses. Going back to what we said at the beginning, you really want to have not just the job description, but, like, what are the skills and competencies this person needs to possess, and what do they might need to possess down the road or strengthen, which is related to that first phase of most companies finding product market fit. So you have some points on this slide around the product market fit profile. Want to expand a bit?
Absolutely. So this is where your super generalists thrive, right? I think this is something where I know when I was trying to get my first job in tech, I was a generalist, and no one would hire me because I wasn't a specialist in something, right? This is when organizations were getting super big. There was lots of cash. And now these people are just so critical to these early, like, pre-product market fit. Even a lot of Series A's and B's are refining product market fit right now in this environment. It's really critical that you have people like this. So often they're a jack of all trades. They're good at a lot of stuff, not great at most things, which is okay. They are not afraid to break things. This one, I think, is so critical, and they have a really strong propensity for action. They want to try and instead of plan. If you have someone that wants to build a lot of plans, they're really going to have a hard time in this type of organization. They also having a strong understanding of how the business as like a full entity works, because as a marketer, if they're a marketer of one, they're not working with just a marketing team, right? They're working with every function in the organization. So having a really good kind of business acumen, this is something that can be taught, but it's amazing if they come in with it, right? To understand how the business works. And they have to be really comfortable with being uncomfortable. So not having the answers, not knowing exactly where they're going, but feeling like as long as they have a leading indicator, they can run. Like, this is, and I think the biggest thing, it's okay if you're not this person. I'm not this person. Like, I am not a marketer of one. And I know that about myself, right? And I think it's really important that I certainly know how to hire them, but it's really important to know yourself and to know what you need as an organization. I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? I was on mute the entire time.
No, I can hear you.
I was on mute.
I thought it was just I thought it was just me. I didn't realize you were on mute, but I thought it was just my headphones.
No,
So
no, I
that's
was
why
on
I
mute
didn't
the
want to
entire
interrupt
time.
you.
Sorry. So what I was saying, folks who like just missed that whole minute, don't worry, it's still here. What I was saying at this stage is like the idea of competencies and skill sets. It's super important to match out, when you're going from 10, 20 people, what are the exact things these people need to do, and hiring for potential. Like, hey, this person I think could become a manager or future leader. So I see that line of sight in their IQ and EQ, and I can really hire for potential while also knowing they can do this job as well. And some of this is both internal, hiring, external hiring at this stage, but just having the skill sets identified, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I heard this in like 2016. So it's been a long time, but I still see it being very true, is that you want folks that are growing at the same pace as your organization, right? Because those are the folks that are going to be able to continue to grow at the pace that the organization is growing. And I think that is where it sounds a little squishy and hard to identify. Like, it's not easy to be like, well, are you Google Ads certified? It's not it's not as easy to see, but it's really important that you as a leader can pick out the folks that you're like, oh, these are the folks that can ride with me as the organization grows. If the organization has stopped growing and is kind of going toward profitability and is leveling out, you're going to see some of those folks have a hard time staying, right? And that's okay. I think it's just really critical for you as a leader to stay on top of that and really understand. Like, I watched a lot of our team turn over, specifically at QuickBase, because the organization went from being a very kind of like maintenance, like they would grow, they were really profitable, but they were just kind of like growing kind of slow. And then new investment came in and we needed to skyrocket. And some of the folks on the team were really excited about that pace. And others were like, whoa, I don't want this. Like, I liked what we were doing before. And that's okay. It just means that the team is going to have to change, right? And shift. So I think that's really critical specifically in the go-to-market fit profile, that you understand want to do that and what don't, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if you think about this goes back to the first thing we said, which is what are the guiding principles, rituals, frameworks, systems, mission, purpose. Like, use all of that as part of your hiring process, especially at this stage, but also in product market fit stage. Like, you want to see how aligned these new hires are to those things. Like, as you get bigger, you're going to have to figure out more ways to systemize and scale things. So you're going to want people who also, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are going to be good at developing that system or that framework, or, hey, we can execute something with now 30 people instead of 3 people. So we built this presentation to hopefully kind of tell a story, right? It's like, hey, get your team set up at the foundation. Think about how you can, coach, develop them, manage them, lead them. But then when you think about hiring someone, use all the things that you're doing today as a way to kind of gut check, are they the right addition, not fit to the team, addition? Are they going to bring out your principles in a bigger, better way? Are they going to add and help the culture of the team, add and help the way the team operates and make it stronger and better?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another reason why if you're having a hard time hiring, it might be because you haven't done that first step, right? You can't figure out who's going to add because you don't know who you are. And so I think that's a really critical point.
Yeah. And it's related to rituals. So a ritual, in my opinion, Shannon, they're different than habits. Some people think they might be the same. Rituals help create habits, but a ritual could be anything from like a standing one-to-one every week. We did a ritual at HubSpot for 8 years when I was there with my team called the weekly customer delight meeting, where we talked about customer feedback and customer delight moments every single week for an hour. They still do the meeting today at HubSpot. It now involves a lot of executives. That meeting's been around for 14 years. Very powerful meeting that my team started. I'm so proud of what they did. And those rituals, if done well and done consistently, can have huge lasting impact on how the team reaches its goals and executes. Weekly pacing is a type of ritual. So it could be individual, team-based. It could be at the company level that you align these rituals to, but you as a leader need to create muscle strength and then give people the ability to create their own habits and habits within the team. And I think this is where rituals come into play. Shannon, what are some rituals that you've seen or that you've developed?
Yeah, I've now done a few this might be a trigger word for some people, agile transformations. So going from folks that are operating in more of a waterfall, kind of like baton pass kind of structure, and moving into more of an agile structure. I think the full transformation is a little much for me, but I find that agile principles really, really help teams, especially remote teams, function really well together. So that means weekly sprint planning. That means daily stand-ups. It means every single week or every 2 weeks, depending. I think at early stage, every week is critical. Every week learning meetings, right? Like how are we, and then looking at the scoreboard, understanding if we're winning or if we're losing, and then what plays we're going to run the next week, right? And I think that kind of ritual is really powerful for teams that are working in a distributed model as well as working across the organization, right? I think that's one. I think the one-on-ones I talked about, which I think the other thing that rituals do is they provide comfort for your team in predictability in a very unpredictable world, right? Like their job is relatively unpredictable and rituals provide them, it's kind of like having a kid, right? Like they know every day when they wake up, like the first thing they do is brush their teeth or whatever, right? My son's very young. He doesn't really do that yet, but I know that there's some comfort in the ritual. And I think that that's really important for your team as you're asking them to take risks and do new things, like that they know at least every Friday they're going to learn. They're going to sit and they're going to report on what they learned, and then we're going to move on Monday, right? And I think that I've seen that be really powerful for small teams.
Yeah, I agree. Small and big teams need them, and small and big teams also need feedback. And feedback is a ritual. I'll give you one framework or as it relates to feedback: situation, behavior, impact. Have you heard about that one, Shannon? SBI.
I vaguely did, but you should explain to me.
So I was trained this. I was trained on this framework at HubSpot. Man, it must have been like 2013 or 14. It's very simple. You're trying to give objective feedback from your point of view. If you try to give feedback to someone from a third person point of view, they can poke holes at it really easily. So the way you typically try to give feedback is like, hey, Shannon, I noticed in the meeting that we just had that you were looking at the ground a lot and didn't make great eye contact. And for me, it made me feel like you were not fully confident about what you were presenting. That's SBI in 20 seconds. Here's the situation. Here's the behavior. Here's the impact. And it on me, not someone else. Like, hey, I think those other people didn't think you knew what you were talking about. Like, you don't know that. You don't know if those other people did or didn't know. But I know from my point of view, this is what happened. So giving feedback, and by the way, you could use that SBI for negative or positive feedback. But
Yeah, absolutely. I think, sorry, you froze a little, so I wanted to make sure I'm answering the correct question. So I've seen this work really well when you also use your own experience. So I've sometimes done this to say, hey, when I first started working with this specific executive, this is what I learned very quickly in how they work best, right? And so it puts you in the seat of not being like the judger, but being someone that's in kind of the trenches with them to say, hey, it is so, I find this a lot with founders. Like if you don't want to necessarily completely shield your team from the founders because you want them to learn, right? You want them to see how those founders are growing. But a lot of what you do as a VP at an early stage company is founder management. It's a lot of what you do. So I do think it is important to say, hey, when I work with the CEO, I often use these like 3 things. I know I watched in that meeting, you tried to use these other things. Like, I think, and you saw it, you didn't get the response you wanted, right? Like I know you felt it didn't feel good. So let's try this next time and see how it goes. It's worked for me in the past, right? And it kind of puts you in more of a partnership than necessarily feeling like you're always going to be critical of them, or that if I'm in a meeting, they're always going to get feedback. Like that is like, you don't want that to necessarily feel that way, because then they won't feel like they can come to you and trust you and ask you questions in a very like actually be vulnerable with you, because they feel like you're always going to critique everything they do.
No, I like the empathetic approach you just gave there. That's really good. And the last thing we want to talk about is this idea of managing up, down, and across. So when you're at a big company, this is super important. When I was at HubSpot, there was 4 or 5 other VPs that I had to manage across. I had to manage up to the CMO. I had to manage down to my team. I had to help my managers do this as well. my golden rule when it comes to managing up, down, and across is over communicate. Like communication, they say like 99% of business is people. I think communication is 99% of leadership.
Yep.
And when you think about the relationships, you called out these three, which I think are spot on. No matter if you're a 10-person company, early stage, or a 3,000-4,000 person company, the marketing leader with the CEO, the CFO, and CRO, those are the three most important relationships you either have to manage up to, depending on your position, or manage across, because those people are going to be really the ones that are going to help you reach your goals at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I think this is one that was really, really not tough for me to learn, but one I didn't see coming is going from your team. So say you're a middle manager. Your team is your direct reports and your peers usually, right? I've been at companies where I don't have a lot of peers as a middle manager. Sometimes like there aren't a lot of us. Sometimes there are more. And then you get into more of an executive role and your team is your executive team. It is not your functional team necessarily. And I think it's a huge shift in the way that you talk about the business, the way you talk about coaching, the way you talk about your priorities. It's not about protecting your team, meaning the folks that report into you. It's about the team as your executive team on what you're going to do for the business. And that's where I think this kind of managing across is so critical, because you need to be seen, especially as a marketing leader that can sometimes get a bad rap of like, they're just spending money or they're just doing, marketing sometimes gets like the worst rap on the executive, kind of round table. But how do you become a really trusted partner? How do you become someone that people want to hear from and want opinions on for CS, for finance, for other things that are not just what are considered marketing? And I think that's the biggest kind of growth moment that it was for me coming into a VP role is, my team is a new team now. I love that. But for some folks, it is a little bit, there are growing pains for sure.
Well said, Shannon. I mean, we could have a masterclass on almost any of these. So if you folks listening have questions about any of them or want us to do a little mini masterclass on any of the 7 things, let us know in Slack. Thank you for coming. Shannon, is there any last thing you want to say to folks listening to this masterclass today that is super important as it relates to leadership, marketing leadership?
Yeah, I once had someone tell me that building and hiring an org is the greatest lever you have as a leader in an organization. And I truly believe that that's the case. And I know that there's a lot of pressure from the board to hit the numbers. There's a lot of pressure for your peers to ship the stuff. But if you don't have an organization that is continuing to scale and grow, you will plateau. And so give yourself that list of things to do, because it's never going to come from the board, right? So I think it's really important to keep yourself accountable to this work, because it will pay off. It always has for me. And anytime I've coached anyone to do it, it has for them as well. So
accountability, don't make excuses, and try to find your own mentorship, coach as well. That's the last tip I'll leave you. Like as a leader, create a personal board of directors. I've seen that being done successful. Have a coach, have 1 or 2 mentors, someone you can rely on to go to as well outside of your organization.
Completely.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining the masterclass for this week. Hope you loved it. If you have any questions, reach out to Shannon or I, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you again, Shannon.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.